I'm Mark Kelley. On this edition of The Fifth Estate, catastrophic floods.
We are just next to the river. I'm so scared.
Communities cut off. Lives on the line.
There was nothing we could do for the people that you knew were alive under the mud.
British Columbia is a province that's bearing the brunt of a changing climate.
The last few days have been incredibly difficult for British Columbians. Heavy rains, strong winds, flooding have devastated entire communities of our province.
There was really nowhere you could go.
Our infrastructure is built for a planet that no longer exists. We design and build our infrastructure based on the climate of the past.
Yet our investigation shows warnings have been ignored time and time again.
I think it was preventable and it was predictable.
Making this a disaster just waiting to happen.
What our response shows is that for governments, experience has become making the same mistake over and over again, but with greater confidence.
And there's one question that keeps coming up.
It's all gone.
Shouldn't we have seen this coming? Here in beautiful BC, there were signs this wasn't going to be a normal fall almost 3 weeks before the floods hit.
We've seen some pretty big storms and nothing like this at all.
A low-pressure weather bomb pounded Vancouver Island and BC's south coast, knocking out power in 9,000 homes.
Oh my God.
Then 2 weeks later, a rare tornado touched down at the University of British Columbia, just outside Vancouver and near the airport.
You okay? Yeah, okay. I'm okay.
Stunning, experienced meteorologists.
It sure had our collective jaws on the ground when we saw a tornado off of YVR, something that we've never seen before.
But something bigger, something more severe was building over the Pacific Ocean.
Seeing upwards of 20 millimeters an hour is fairly normal, but seeing 3 or 4 hours like that is really a head scratcher.
What's called an atmospheric river was heading inland. These rivers in the sky are bands of moisture hundreds of kilometers long. Many harmlessly supply needed rain and snow, but this one was something worse.
What's incredible and maybe terrifying to think about is that climate change actually projects atmospheric rivers to not only get more frequent, not only to last longer, but also to get more intense.
So if climate change is signaling more extreme weather events, why weren't we better prepared for this one? On November 9th, 4 days before the storm struck, Environment Canada issued a snow warning up to 25 centimeters for the BC interior.
Okay, that's an eerie sound.
2 days later, the U.S. National Weather Service started escalating warnings for northern Washington, calling for a major flood stage event, and that residents should be prepared to take action, and informing them where to get sandbags.
We definitely saw an atmospheric river coming. We saw it build throughout the week. It really looked like it was going to be hitting the coast and moving south and actually really focused on Washington State. We see that and we say to ourselves, okay, that's impressive, but so far it's not affecting our jurisdiction.
On November 13th, the storm changed path, barreling towards BC. Environment Canada revised its forecast, calling for up to 150 millimeters of rain. But BC's Ministry of Forests downplayed the threat. Rivers are expected to rise rapidly Sunday and ease on Monday as the heaviest rainfall passes. November 14th, this is what was heard twice across the border on the American side. A flood alarm telling residents to brace for high waters, move livestock to higher ground.
Hi, this is Bruce Bamman. I was notified not that long ago that the air raid sirens in Sumas, Washington are going off.
The alarm was heard by some on the Canadian side of the border, prompting this BC MLA to send out a warning of his own on Facebook.
Now, in the past, what that has meant is that the Nooksack has flooded, has breached its banks, and that the floodwaters are on the way to Sumas. Look after yourselves, be careful.
Then later that day, the atmospheric river hit. Disaster quickly followed. Roads and bridges swept away. Communities swallowed up by the rising waters. In the BC interior, landslides left entire communities cut off from supplies, medicine, food, and help.
You can't predict what the weather's going to be like more than a week or so into the future. But we absolutely can say that the statistics of weather are changing.
Catherine Hayhoe is a world-renowned climatologist, originally from Toronto, now based in Texas.
We know that these naturally occurring atmospheric rivers are getting more intense and they're dropping a lot more rain in a warmer world. Simply because warmer air holds more water vapor. And so now when a storm comes along, there's a lot more water vapor in the air for that storm to sweep up and dump on us than there was 50 or 100 years ago.
Ever since the middle of September, we have been dealing with extraordinarily active weather, generally speaking. You know, we're talking about over 200% of normal precipitation, including 5 atmospheric rivers, 3 bomb cyclones, a tornado, and who knows what else before 2021 is over.
No area may be more vulnerable in BC than here in the Fraser Valley, a short drive east from Vancouver. Flat agricultural lands surrounded by mountains and at the mercy of the temperamental Fraser River. The region relies on a series of dikes and pump stations to hold back seasonal floodwaters.
Everybody stop by that flashing light, please.
This pump house normally keeps the Fraser River out of the Sumas Prairie. This storm pushed it to the brink of failing, if not for 200 volunteers who showed up to protect it by piling up walls of sandbags, trying to turn back a climate catastrophe.
Earlier this morning, we expanded the Sumas Prairie evacuation order. Approximately 1,100 homes are now impacted.
I was watching what the River Forecast Center was saying, and you know, there's that pit in your stomach where you're thinking, is this the moment where I get to say I told you so? We know there are atmospheric rivers, and we've known for a long time that this was going to be a big concern for winter flooding in BC. And as someone who pays attention to this, you could see it coming.
Tamsin Lyle is an engineer who helps communities reduce their flood risks. She went to survey the damage a week after the storm hit.
Okay, there we go.
So right now we're seeing into the United States. This is the old Sumas lake bed. Right below us right now we have the Sumas River, which used to be a natural river that would drain this area. It doesn't anymore. It's now a diked system. So flowing out that way, the Sumas River, that's flowing out through the pump station into the Fraser River. And right under us right now is what used to be a lake and is the lake again. And it's thousands of people's homes and animals. One of the most productive agricultural regions in all of Canada is right under our feet now.
Now those farms were underwater, along with their livestock and their livelihoods. A century ago, the prairie was a lake, drained to make way for these farms. It didn't take long for nature to try to reclaim the lake bed. In 1948, a third of the Fraser Valley sat under murky black water. Thousands had to be evacuated. The valley has occasionally flooded since, leading many to wonder if all the measures to hold back the waters are enough.
My husband was up all night because we knew there was an alert. By 6 o'clock, I looked outside and it was like we're in the middle of a lake.
Some, like this family, Pavan, Kabir, and Narinder, felt utterly abandoned in their time of need.
I quickly ran to the front of the house and I could see that there was a puddle at the front of the house where we had brought our dogs in, and we just covered it with a towel, but with like an hour and a half, it was like a foot of water in our house.
They called search and rescue. No one came.
And then I had to call them again because from our house, ours wasn't a priority because we were on the upper level and we were safe. But from our house, we could actually see that the dike was breaking. So that's when we were panicking. We're like, we need to get out of here now because the dike is going to break and then it's going to flood a lot more.
Strangers in boats brought them back home to save what they could.
I think the community's coming together, like how they sandbag the Barrowtown pump, how we know there's people stranded in Hope and people are getting the meals. Even here, like sometimes there'll be people standing here with boats just in case somebody needs help, but it's just civilians. It's not like a government agency that's providing any of that help.
The first warnings came not from the province, not from the town.
The actual alert was from Facebook. Really? Yeah. And I could see where the evacuation area is. And right before bed, they were like, okay, now they're going to put an alert on. So they extended the area, so they put everything in yellow, like alert that this area is now on alert. And then the next morning is when they put it all on evacuation, but it was already we were already in water.
There are warning systems in place in BC, just not centralized. It's a patchwork of local and regional alert systems triggered at the discretion of local authorities.
The province has been in continual contact with local governments, and we're working to support those affected. Local governments are monitoring the situation in their communities and standing up emergency operation centers as needed.
Andrew Nikiforuk is a journalist covering environmental issues.
The first response from the British Columbia government is that we're not responsible for informing people of a looming disaster. That's all up to municipalities. So, lack of accountability is a symptom of a system in real trouble.
So responsibilities are downloaded to people like Abbotsford Mayor Henry Braun, who chose not to sound the alarm.
And I want to be very clear here. It was our decision not to activate the provincial alert ready system for the whole city of 162,000 people at that time. So we didn't want to alarm the whole city.
Mayor Braun bristled at any suggestion he didn't act soon enough.
If you're asking me, would I do it again the same way? Yes, I would. Everybody in the prairie knew that there was an emergency. The prairie was flooded. There's no sense sending an alert out that's going to scare 162,000 people, which is what the population of Abbotsford is. The 300 or 400 people that were out there at that time, they already knew there was an emergency. All they had to do is look outside the window of their house. The water was everywhere.
I think there's a lot of different people that have to take ownership of this problem. And when we're looking at this kind of scale, I think the province, especially the province of about 20 years ago, 2003, 2004, has a lot to answer for in terms of downloading the responsibility from the province, who had the better capacity to look at this at a regional scale, to local governments who are now, don't have the capacity, don't have the expertise.
Downloading responsibility, lack of expertise can have catastrophic consequences in other parts of BC as well.
It's very sad.
Coming up after the break.
When we try to speak with the provincial government on logging, I feel that we're talking to the wall because they don't listen. We need to plan together, because if we don't, more catastrophic events like this are going to occur annually. We need to be heard.
Look at this bridge. There's nothing left of it.
As the mammoth atmospheric river moved eastward from the Fraser Valley to the BC interior, it left a trail of damage, a trail of death.
It was the scariest thing I've ever seen. I just turned around and I'm just watching the whole side of the mountain come down and taking out these cars and everything just being swept away.
It hit our back wall in our bedroom there and literally knocked us literally onto our feet. And we were in 2 feet of water.
Like a freight train going through your middle of your house, that would have been about the way it was. It took 35 seconds to get our house full of mud and dirt.
BC's coroner's office would later confirm 5 dead in the mudslides. Lives lost along this stretch of highway near Lillooet. The mud washed away highways, railroads, and bridges, leaving people stranded in their cars awaiting rescue.
I'm so scared because we are just next to the river and under the hill. Cars were driving up and down, up and down.
The entire community of Merritt, population 7,000, was told to leave.
We're on evacuation alert. We're actually being evacuated right now.
Heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. Because you can't do anything about it. Didn't expect this. Nobody expected this.
Many climate refugees ended up an hour's drive away in Kamloops.
This is my property here. This was on the first day.
Cassidy Sobchak watched the waters claim her home.
There was water, basically. I lived in a colander. Like, water was coming in the basement windows, it was coming in the front door, it was coming in the back door. It completely filled my basement.
She fled in her pajamas and sandals.
What you see in here is what we have basically right now. Like, we basically got away with the clothes on our bags.
Yeah, it was awful. We started to see that it started to erode underneath our house. So we grabbed what we could at the moment, and yeah, we got out.
The front part that faced the river, the floor went. So I entered the house stupidly, and then a big crack. Gone, just gone. It went under. The river just took it under and gone. Within seconds.
As people fled Merritt, Mayor Linda Brown was heading back to her community.
I got a call as I was driving up the highway, and we knew the rains were coming, and they were coming hard. We were driving through rivers of rain on our way home. Shortly after that, the highways were closed. But by the time I got home to Merritt, my staff had phoned me and said, we're looking at the charts. This was a Sunday afternoon. We're looking at the charts, and there's something wrong here. We don't know what it is, but we have to let you know that there may be something happening. By the time the early evening arrived, they knew that something catastrophic is going to happen, but they had absolutely no idea of how big it was going to be.
The BC Rivers Forecast Centre issued a warning late on Sunday afternoon when they noted that there was going to be a lot of water flowing down the Coldwater and that this had the potential for flooding in the Merritt area.
Greg Lois is Merritt's information officer.
We had no idea that it was going to be like this. When we were watching the gauges that show the river levels down the Coldwater, and when the gauges further up the valley started showing that they were rising dramatically, we assembled the Emergency Operations Centre.
Floodwaters were bearing down on vital city infrastructure, forcing officials to make tough choices.
And so we then began considering whether or not it would be possible to run a city without their sewage infrastructure. And we knew that was when we would have to evacuate absolutely everybody. We realized that we were going to be dealing with something Merritt had never dealt with before.
Those gauges measuring water volume in the Coldwater River were the only warning the city got about the magnitude of the flood.
They didn't get any phone calls. This was because of their diligence in looking at websites and what was happening, just based on a gut feeling of how much rain we're getting. And if it weren't for the efforts of staff, it could have been a bigger disaster. By midnight, we had people knocking on doors, and we had people evacuating before the big flood hit. And that credit goes entirely to staff. And I admire them for that.
The rainwater was coming right down the middle of the road. Lower McPhail, to me, I doubted if there's even a road there anymore. Because that was 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon. And all the culverts up there were maximum capacity. The creeks were overwhelmed, they were flooded over.
Lee Spahan is chief of the Coldwater Indian Band, 15 kilometers south of Merritt, and one of 3 Indigenous communities that issued their own evacuations.
The flooding of the river, all that ground over there was all underwater. It washed away the access of the road. The water breached both sides of the banks of the. I'm shocked that they still have hydro. With the trees that are there, it actually saved probably the house from being washed away. The 2 homes there, they were probably underwater by about between 2 and 3 feet of water.
And if Coldwater's neighbor Merritt felt isolated and alone through this, Chief Spahan says his community fared even worse.
No alerts or nothing. And to find out that they were evacuating the city of Merritt, everybody was in shock because, really this is happening this fast. But a lot of people were pretty upset and frustrated because of the lack of response from the city, but also from the provincial government, because there was absolute no warning. I'm tired. I feel burnt out, but just to try to make sure that our members are safe and that they're fed. That's the biggest worry, to make sure that they're safe.
There's an awful lot of homes that are destroyed. Some of them will never be able to recover from that. Others they may be able to fix. But these are people that are losing their livelihood and losing their homes.
It didn't take long for that loss, coupled with a sense of abandonment, to turn into seething frustration.
I don't think any of us are getting what we need right now. I think that maybe if the government could step up and help these people out, it'd be really nice. Lots of us are out here and we don't need to be. Everybody out here is freezing cold and we're standing out here. We've been standing here for 2.5 hours, so maybe Trudeau should come and stand out here for a while. See what it's like.
Like after the fire season where you evacuated everyone to the same place, should you not have somewhat of a plan of how this works or how it should go?
What's your message to the government?
Get it together. Like, this is ridiculous. There are people suffering who cannot help themselves. Like, it's sad. It's so sad.
Call it disaster fatigue. These same residents were put on evacuation alert in August. The threat then? Wildfires. Ironically, it was rain that helped spare Merritt. But the fire damage around the city compounded the flood damage to the city.
Well, because there were a lot of fires in the region over the summer and a lot of the hills and trees have been burned, there is nothing to hold the water back. And we had rain for days and days on end. And that rain just came down and it all ended up in the river, and the river just did its thing. And it was nasty, and this catastrophe is a result of both the fires and the flooding of the Coldwater.
These are satellite images over the last 35 years showing the disappearing tree canopy around Merritt, extensive logging, fires, extreme heat, even a pine beetle infestation have led to the weakening of the soil leading to the landslides.
Anyone who's familiar with the interior of BC and how narrow the passes are, how narrow the rivers are, how extensive the logging has been over the last 100 years. And then you introduce something like climate change, which changes the whole hydrology, the whole water regime. And yeah, you're going to have trouble, big trouble.
In BC, they've already been talking about, why are we logging old growth forests? You know what? When we have trees, those trees keep the soil anchored, prevent landslides. They're a lot healthier and more resilient when forest fires come along, and they soak up the water when we get the heavy rainfall, and they take up carbon too.
We've been putting pressure on the provincial government about the logging, but they need to sit down at the table with First Nations leadership to make that happen, because they need our knowledge so that way we can work collaboratively to make it work. Because we all live in this world, but when they're only looking at it one-sided, it never works.
You look down at an individual farm and realize that the barn is up to its rafters. It's horrible.
When we come back.
So one of my proudest moments is that I kept that line in that report where I said flood risk governance was broken, and we were asked to tone the language down, and I didn't.
There are so many ways to measure the impact of the catastrophic flooding in BC. The number of people displaced, the number of livestock that perished. the cost of the cleanup. But a helicopter ride over the area near Abbotsford says it all. Tamsin Lyle has studied the Sumas Prairie Basin for 20 years.
It's so beautiful. And you look down at an individual farm and realize that the barn is up to its rafters. It knows what's on the inside of it. It's horrible to think about.
For more than a century, there's been extensive diking, pumping, and planning to try to keep the water away. But last week, those protections failed and the lake returned. All it took was floodwater to spill over the aging Sumas River dike next to Highway 1, which links BC to the rest of Canada.
Oh, here's the breach right below us. The big breach. We've known about these problems. In fact, one of my colleagues this morning said the Sumas area is one of the most studied flood problems in all of Canada, and yet we still didn't do anything better.
And for those living next to it, the Sumas dike would unleash chaos in the basin below.
Narendra's taking Savna outside.
Remember Kabir, Pavan, and Narinder? They were left to grab whatever they could as floodwaters were rising in their home by the minute.
So the whole bottom floor, all the floors ripped out. There's at least a foot and a half of water.
The sofas are floating around.
And Narinder's cedar farm, gone.
My tractor's all underwater. ATV side by side. My welders, my truck loaded with the trees.
But could all of this have been prevented? That's a question people are starting to ask.
There's water in the truck now. I think knowing that this is a lake bed, that this was a lake before, maybe they need to be more prepared. I think the climate's changing. The weather is getting warmer, we're getting more forest fires, and we're going to get more flooding.
So what did the authorities know about the looming threat of a flood? And who was supposed to make sure these dikes could withstand the test? In British Columbia, those are complicated questions and a political hot potato.
To do that, we have to stop the water from coming all the way here.
Each day brought a new crisis for Abbotsford Mayor Henry Braun, but he's worried about the long-term impact.
This is enormous, and the aftermath, I don't think we fully appreciate yet the devastation and how long it's going to take to recover. I think that's going to be years.
The challenge of keeping these waters at bay has been a concern for years. This vast area of farmland stretches across a patchwork of local, provincial, federal, and international jurisdictions.
This big straight highway is the border.
Just south of the Sumas Basin is the U.S. border and another source of tension. The Nooksack River is located in Washington state, but when it overflows, that water heads north, flowing downhill across the border and towards the Sumas Basin. In 1990, that's exactly what happened, destroying homes and causing millions in damage. The danger of floodwaters from the U.S. has preoccupied mayors from Abbotsford for decades.
And there was a commission, a trans-border commission between Canada and the United States, and they did all sorts of wonderful things and came up with a study. But out of that really has come nothing. We all knew this was a problem. The city itself has done studies, recent studies, imploring federal or senior levels of government to do something about it.
Floodwaters from the U.S. are one thing, but it's the threat within BC that has communities across the Lower Mainland really worried. They're at the mercy of an aging series of dikes. This whole region has been largely re-engineered by man, a complicated, intricate weave of 600 kilometers of dikes and levees designed to harness nature and hold back rivers from taking back the land. But it doesn't always work. This report in 2015 found the Sumas River dike was presently too low, substandard, and likely needs to be updated.
We knew that the Sumas dike was low, or it shouldn't be at that level, or it should be raised. But local government doesn't have the financial wherewithal because we only collect property taxes, and we can't build for our dikes. The impact on our dikes, if we have to build them to the standards of the senior levels of government, is a $400 million bill 2 years ago. This isn't just peculiar to Abbotsford. This is peculiar to our neighbors in Chilliwack and Agassiz and Kent and Hope. township of Langley downstream. I would say in a few words, money. This is a big bill. We've warned for years and throughout my term. We have not been investing in our infrastructure at every level for decades. And this is what happens when you ignore warnings.
On the other side of the Sumas Basin is Chilliwack, 30 kilometers from Abbotsford. For days, it was cut off from the rest of the country. Store shelves were emptied. Thousands of homes evacuated.
We've got, you can see how many different major water bodies.
Jason Lum is chair of the Fraser Valley Regional District.
This is the most serious emergency in my time here, and I've lived here my whole life. And I cannot recall another catastrophic event of this nature in the last, I'm going to say, almost 100 years. It's heartbreaking. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Absolutely. Yeah.
And Lum believes this heartbreak never had to happen.
I think it was preventable, and I think it was predictable. I've participated in studies and panels where I've raised the same concern, it seems, for the last 10 to 15 years. There's going to be a time and a place where we're all going to be held accountable for our role.
So who should be held accountable? The province sets the standards for dike safety, but local communities are the ones that have to pay for it. And in 2015, this map showed the majority of dikes were in need of urgent repair.
You look at the regional district, and even though it's a large geographic area, you've still got very, very small service areas with, sometimes less than 100 people. It's absolutely asinine to think that they could pay for a multi-million-dollar dike upgrade. It's unfair to just leave the responsibility to the local governments and the regional governments. We do not have the capacity to handle it.
We have all these local governments who are unfortunately competing for the same resources, and they're doing exactly what they should be doing, fighting for their own constituents and their own communities. It doesn't make sense to manage water on the scale of the local government.
In fact, we found alarms have been raised in report after report, dozens in the last 2 decades. In this 2015 study, the province was warned that none of the dikes assessed in the Lower Mainland fully met the provincial standard, and that many could be expected to fail during a large-scale flood. Another in 2016 found that a major Lower Mainland flood would be Canada's most costly natural disaster. And in 2018, the BC Auditor General found diking infrastructure will likely not be sufficient in the face of increasing flood risks. Just this May, Tamsin Lyle wrote a report for the BC government. She says bureaucrats told her to tone down her findings.
We said the flood risk governance system in BC is broken, and we highly recommended that they take some of the authority back, and also, of course, that they fund these things better. They said, can you take that out of our report, please? It's one of my proudest moments is that I kept that line in that report, and we were asked to tone the language down, and I didn't.
In the BC capital, Victoria, there's a small team working for the province who oversee dike safety and flood risk. Lyle says they've also been sending warning signals to their superiors.
I know that these folks have been banging their heads against a wall for the last 2, 3, 5 years, trying to get the attention of higher folks at the government on these issues, and it's a pretty thankless task.
BC's Ministry of Forests oversees the Dike Safety Office, but our questions were directed to Deputy Premier Mike Farnworth.
Minister Farnworth, I want to ask you about some decisions that have been made or not made in the past in BC. In 2015, the province commissioned a report on the state of dikes in the Lower Mainland. It assessed 74 dikes and found that 96% of them did not meet the provincial standard. Since that report was published, how many dikes have been brought up to standard?
Well, there has been an ongoing program in terms of trying to bring dikes up to standard. For example, February this year, we completed a survey in terms of the dike, what's called the dike crest. to see where things are at. There have been investments in terms of diking of about $105 million over the last couple of years. At the same time, there's also been investment in terms of flood mapping to get a much better understanding of the nature of the flood risk.
In 2015, there was a report commissioned by the province that found the Sumas River dike was, quote, too low, substandard, and needed to be updated. Why wasn't it fixed?
We have had an ongoing dike repairing and dike investment program within the province, as I said, about $105 million, along with additional flood mapping and working with local governments to get a good understanding of the nature of our dikes.
We've spoken to municipality after municipality says that they've been asking for more financial help from the province, and their cries for help have not been answered.
What we have seen in this province is an unprecedented weather event that none of the experts expected would be the way that it was. And what I have also explained to you is that the responsibility for diking was transferred from the province to local governments a number of years ago. One of the lessons from this event, obviously, is the need for continued investment in dikes, and in my view, a stronger role for the province in that process.
But for Tamsin Lyle, that admission comes far too late.
I mean, the province has known or has had the capacity to know, because there's been reports on this for decades. If you are in a home that's been flooded and you've lost your pictures, you know, your baby pictures, your grandparents' heirlooms, and all of those things, it's incredibly emotional and it's so frustrating and you feel so angry. So it's hard not to say something when you know that we knew this was coming.
Every day I just come here, park my truck here and watch, see how deep the water goes now. If I can go back. I just come here every day. Everything's underwater.
When we come back.
I can't really put people back in the community and then trying to evacuate them out of there in the spring. And then the creeks and that, where we're gonna come out, will be swollen. So I don't need to have that heartache of trying to rescue people again.
It's been 10 days since an atmospheric river dumped record amounts of rainfall on parts of BC. Now the floodwaters are slowly receding, and what they reveal illustrates the challenges people face next. About 20 members of the Shaken Indian Band are now stranded in this work camp, part of the Trans Mountain Pipeline construction project.
We don't know when we're going to go home.
Yvonne Joe is a band counselor.
We live in a remote community, but we call that home. And when I think about leaving, we're also a very spiritual people. The day I drove out, I called on my ancestors to take care of the land. And now we'd have a home to go home to. So it's very emotional. It's a very emotional time.
This is what she and others left behind. 40 kilometers north of Merritt, the community was still recovering from the summer forest fires. After going from one climate calamity to another,
The valley that's been devastated is down in that route there.
Band Chief Arnold Lompro says he doesn't know when people can return home.
Realistically, I'm gonna wait until next either May or June after the spring runoff, because I want to know what's going to happen, and I can't really put our people back in the community and then trying to evacuate them out of there in the spring when the creeks and that where we're going to come out will be swollen. So I don't need to have that heartache of trying to rescue people again.
So who will be there for them? And so many others in BC who have lived through a year of chaos and survival. And do governments at all levels now see this calm after the storm as a time to act decisively?
What used to be a 1 in 500 year event is probably now a 1 in 50 year event or a 1 in 5 year event. They don't understand and appreciate that the scale and the pace of everything has changed. And this is just the beginning of climate change.
I really hope that we do this differently next time, but I also am cynical, having seen them not do it the previous 20 times.
For Tasman Lyle, there are no more lessons to be learned. The time to act is now.
It's just incredibly hard to see that we didn't make good choices that would have enabled the river to do what the river needs to do, but also allow us to live it in this space better. I know that we need to live here. We can't sterilize this land. It's, one of the most productive agricultural plots of land in all of Canada, and it's people's homes. But we can do better than this.
And while governments calculate the costs of a cleanup and compensation, what about the human cost of this climate crisis?
Just knowing that we're not going to be able to go back home is devastating. And they're talking about 2 years, maybe, if that, and they're going to change the road to get to home. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Is this going to happen every year for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids? We don't know. But we have to do something to slow down on the logging and the mining, because that has a huge impact on Mother Earth. And this is a message not only from Mother Earth, but from the sacred water that goes down, is you better take care of me or I can wipe you out in an instant. That's what we've been told, what the elders were saying, is that's how powerful water can be.
If you have a story you think needs to be told, send us your tips to fifthtips@cbc.ca. For a more confidential way to contact us, visit our website at cbc.ca/fifth and click on Secure Drop.